We have our first dual passage here. So as always, do the questions and read the passage before you watch this section of videos. And we want to approach these questions in the way that we always approach dual passages. So do the specific questions for each passage first, and then do the general questions. But of course, I'm going to do the questions here in the order they're presented, just for the purpose of these videos. Within passage 1, the main purpose of the first 2 paragraphs is to notice this key phrase here kind of indicates that this might be more of a general question. And I think it is. We need to have read really the whole thing to do this question. But again, we'll do this one right now. So what is the main purpose of the first 2 paragraphs? In 1894, British psychologist C. Lloyd Morgan published what's called Morgan's Canon, the principle that suggestions of human-like mental processes behind an animal's behavior should be rejected if a simpler explanation will do. Still, people seem to maintain certain expectations, especially when it comes to birds and mammals. We somehow want to prove they are as smart as people, zoologist Sarah Shuttleworth says. We want a bird that masters a vexing problem to be employing human-style insight. So what do we have here? Well, the first paragraph, it lays out this principle that if you think an animal is doing something human-like, we should reject that if we can find a simpler explanation. And the second paragraph says, despite this principle, people still want to find the human in the behavior of animals. In the thinking of animals, indeed. So, what does this do? Does this offer historical background in order to question the uniqueness of 2 researchers' findings? So when we would read on later, it goes on to a discussion of this experiment about this bird using a tool and what other birds might... basically, if it was just Loch Gorf, other types of that bird use the tool in that way, and they do. But it doesn't really talk about this bit, which is questioning the uniqueness of these findings. It doesn't really do that. Especially this first part doesn't question the uniqueness, so we can get rid of A. Offer interpretive context in order to frame the discussion of an experiment and its results. Yeah, that's pretty good, right? So this is giving us this, like on the one hand, there's this principle. On the other, people really want to see the human. So here's a case where we have this bird using a tool. We can kind of see, okay, is it the bird really thinking in a human-like way, or is there a simpler explanation? So we can definitely see how this opening contradiction, this opening discussion frames what's coming to follow. So I like B. Introduce a scientific principle in order to show how an experiment's outcomes validated that principle. Certainly it's introducing a principle in the first paragraph. This says nothing about what's going on in the second, and I don't even think this experiment validates that anyway. Yeah, if anything, it seems to point to our need to give human-like motives and human-like styles of insight, as they say, to animals, where maybe a simpler explanation would do better. So this is not really showing how it validates the principle. Present seemingly contradictory stances in order to show how they can be reconciled empirically. No, I mean, they are contradictory, sort of. Like one side might think that you want to find the simpler explanation, another thinks you want to impose human categories on their thinking. So it's contradictory, but they're not being reconciled empirically in what follows. So we can get rid of D, and we go with choice B. Another tough question here, and again, we have to be careful, as I've mentioned previously, and as we've seen previously. Even though we have a line reference, another part of the question indicates that this is actually more of a general question than anything else. So we'll see if they're going to do this more on the test, perhaps. But we always want to pay attention to not just the reference, but the question as a whole, because that will often give us some hints as to how we should approach it. Otherwise, though, pretty tough question. Need to understand the passage as a whole. Need to understand how those first 2 paragraphs frame what's following. Beyond that, though, pretty standard dual passage type question, in the sense that we want to understand passage 1 as a whole so that later we can compare them.